Welcome to Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Deborah Glick, and I represent New York's State Assembly District 66, which includes Tribeca, Soho, the Village, East and West. And as my constituents and colleagues know, I have long been an advocate for a woman's right to make her own reproductive health decisions. Today, I'm proud to be the go-to person on choice in the Assembly and to lead debates on abortion and contraception. We've accomplished many victories over the years, but we still have a long way to go. Joining me to discuss these issues are Farah Diaz-Tello, the Senior Staff Attorney for the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, and Adrienne Verrilli, Associate Vice President for Communications of Planned Parenthood, New York. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks so much for
Thank
having
you.
us.
I wanted to start this conversation around the issue, not so much about abortion, because we do talk about that a great deal, but there's a much wider range of concerns and issues when it comes to reproductive freedom and reproductive health. So I wanted to be able to touch on the other concerns that we have, whether it's sex education, so that we can reduce the need for both abortion or other STDs. We want to be sure that our young people are informed, but we also want to talk about the problems that women have who are pregnant, who want their pregnancies to continue, and yet are being treated in less than appropriate fashion by governments in different states, and the challenges you have actually here in New York State. So I would like to give each of you a couple of minutes to frame your issues as you wish. And Adrienne, why don't we start with Planned Parenthood?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having Planned Parenthood of New York City on today. And we agree with you. When we think about the services that Planned Parenthood provides, it's really a comprehensive view of sexual and reproductive health. So we want to make sure that all people have access to contraceptive services, have access to STI and STD testing, to pregnancy testing, to counseling, to abortion services. So when we think about Planned Parenthood, it's a much larger picture than a lot of folks think just it's about abortion services. And really complementing that are the comprehensive sex education that we do throughout New York City, making sure that it's so important that young people get the information they need to make healthy decisions. And what we do know is when young people have the tools and the skills and the information, they engage in much less risky behavior, and they have much more long-lasting, healthy relationships.
That's great. Farah, I know that the National Advocates for Pregnant Women work throughout the country, and there have been some really tragic and startling cases that you've undertaken. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the work that's done nationally, but also we'll talk a little bit more about what happens here within New York State, because I think many of the viewers will make the assumption that New York State is just fine, and I don't think that's true.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is true. So at National Advocates for Pregnant Women, we defend women who are accused of a crime or a civil child welfare offense for something that they allegedly did or didn't do with respect to their pregnancy. So we see reproductive freedom as encompassing much more than the question of whether or not to carry a pregnancy to term, but to what happens to you if you try to and are unable to, or what happens to you as you give birth or after you give birth. And so many of the cases that we see involve, for example, women who struggle with addiction and carry a pregnancy to term and then are charged with a crime for giving birth to a baby who is substance exposed at birth. Or they can involve women who want to avoid having a cesarean section. They disagree with their doctor and are forced to undergo unwanted surgery, either by court order or with no color of law at all. And in fact, so those are some of the cases that we've seen right here in New York. As you mentioned, our work is of national scope. We do a lot of work in Tennessee, in Alabama, in what we call red states, states where reproductive freedom is under attack in a number of ways. And people don't expect that right here in New York, in fact, right here in New York City, we've seen cases, especially including the forced cesarean case. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that as we progress.
Well, I think that people ought to know and be aware of the fact that every year when the state budget is enacted, when we discuss the health budget, there is automatically an amendment proposed, a hostile amendment, to eliminate Medicaid funding for abortions. And as we all know, wealthy women have always had access to abortion, even when it was illegal. Our concern, and I'm proud that New York State beats this back every year, but the fact that we go through this exercise is in itself somewhat disturbing. But the women who are affected are young women and poor women. So perhaps we could talk a little bit about the services that you have and what you're opening a new clinic now in the coming months in Queens, which is perhaps an underserved area, but close to transportation.
It's very close to transportation. Thanks for, so I want to address the Medicaid issue first. And yes, we are very fortunate that New York State does fund abortion services for women who need it. And just like you said, when we're looking at these restrictions, whether it's a tax on pregnant women and what they do, the decisions they make during their pregnancy, or the decision to terminate a pregnancy, so much of the barriers that exist are around access to money and access to be able to get the services they need. So, and more and more again, this is falling on low-income women, poor women, women of color. And, you know, I think it's important for everyone in New York State to know that 4 sitting senators from New York City represent those views, don't represent a woman's right to make her own decisions, a woman's right to have access to the health care that she needs. We are opening in Queens, and we will be providing abortion services there. We will offer a full range of reproductive health services as well as education and training. We are opening in mid-June, and really excited to be in a fast-growing and a diverse community. Queens, as you know, it's really kind of the future of New York. It's the face of the city, and soon to be the face of the nation. And we really want to make sure that we're meeting people where they are, and know that they can come to us and sign up for health insurance. Know that their documentation status is of no concern, because we will care for everyone no matter what.
It seems that in the past we've given lip service to having sex education in the schools. Where are we on that?
So right now, New York City does have a law that mandates 2 semesters of sex ed, 1 in middle school and 1 in high school. But what we're finding is, 1, it's not happening, and 2, there's really no mechanism to monitor whether or not young people are getting that information. So what we're doing at Planned Parenthood of New York City, as well as advocates around the city, is really working toward finding that, implementing a mechanism that can then track that. But we can't really stop there, and I think you brought it up, you know, as this conversation started. We are really looking to have a comprehensive, medically accurate sex education, kindergarten through 12th grade. Obviously age appropriate, what we're talking with, you know, 6 and 7-year-olds about, we're not talking to 17 and 18-year-olds about. So we really want to make sure that young people have all the information they need, again, to have healthy, communicative relationships. This doesn't leave out parents and families and caregivers. They obviously are a very important part of this conversation, but we know not every young person has a caring adult at home that can kind of help them through this process. So we are in very early stages. We are very much seeking a hearing from the City Council to have a conversation about where New York City can move to really be a national leader in bringing sex education throughout the New York City school system.
That's great. Farah, could you tell us a little bit about the, first of all, the incidence of C-sections we know have gone up over the years for a variety of reasons, not necessarily because women want them. So perhaps you could tell us about the case that you referenced and a little bit about what other concerns we should have here in New York about the way things are happening for women who are pregnant and want to continue their pregnancies.
Absolutely. So a few years back, a woman named Renate Dre wanted to have a vaginal birth after having had 2 cesarean sections. And I guess I should give a little bit of national context. Approximately 1 in 3 births currently is delivered by cesarean section, and it is becoming increasingly difficult for women to find a healthcare provider who will attend them in having a vaginal birth after cesarean section. And there are lots of reasons why a woman might want to avoid having a second surgery. Most importantly, because each successive surgery becomes more and more dangerous. And for Renate Dre, who is an Orthodox Jewish woman who wants to have many children, the possibility of having a 3rd cesarean surgery is something that would really put her health and her future fertility at risk. So she did her research. She did as much as she could to find a provider whom she believed would be supportive of her attempt to have a vaginal birth. And that meant traveling from Brooklyn to Staten Island to deliver her baby. And when she went to the hospital, unfortunately, the doctor who was on call was not the person who had been supporting her throughout her pregnancy. And to make a long story short, she asked for a little bit more time to let her labor progress. And they essentially told her, no, you can't, and wheeled her away to have an unwanted cesarean surgery. Now, it is very rarely the case that we have the legal proof that's necessary to show that the surgery was against a woman's will. But here, in her medical records, it's documented clear as day. The woman has decisional capacity. We've decided to override her decision and to force her to have the cesarean surgery. And this case, what makes it remarkable is that she actually filed a lawsuit. Most women to whom this happens feel they have no recourse. They may not even know that something legally impermissible happened to them. But she has sued through her attorney, Michael Bass, at Silverstein & Bast, and they're filing for malpractice, saying that essentially the illegal act that was committed on her can't be within good medical practice. An assault can't be non-negligent practice. And it really has taken a lot of courage on her part to bring forth this case. One thing that I think is really that people need to know about it is that the hospital's response was that they had a legal duty to save her fetus, even though there was no indication that the fetus was in distress. They had an independent legal duty to operate on her against her will in order to save her fetus. And they essentially said, what she's posing is a difficult political question, but the doctor has the duty and the fetus has a right to be saved. And this is troubling because this is not what the law says. And the hospital has taken it upon themselves to create a policy whereby they can essentially deprive women of their fundamental human rights to make medical decisions about their bodies, their fundamental right to bodily integrity, in the name of fetuses. And so it's striking that in every New York City hospital, in every hospital in New York State, in fact, there's a patient's Bill of Rights that says you have a right to refuse any unwanted medical treatment. But that somewhere in the bowels of the hospital, there may be a policy that lays out how the rights of a pregnant person can be overridden without even use of court order. It's absolutely shocking.
Is there any way that an individual woman could actually ask about that policy in advance and be given any information?
So unfortunately, no. New York, yeah. Wow. New York has really been at the forefront of ensuring that pregnant women have the information they need. New York is one of only 2 states to have a Maternity Information Act that requires that every hospital disclose their rate of cesarean section, their rate of VBAC success, their rate of use of episiotomy and other medical interventions so that women can know what they're getting into when they choose the hospitals that they go to. Ms. Dre, as I mentioned, she chose the hospital that she did because it had a very high rate of VBAC success and because she expected that she would be treated with respect and dignity there. Unfortunately, the data that's required to be produced by the hospital to help her make those decisions doesn't include whether or not the hospital has any policies by which they deprive people of their human rights.
Well, I suppose that's something that we should be pursuing. And naturally, I will take it up with the chair of our health committee because it is very concerning to me that women, there have been many instances in legislation where for some reason the pregnant woman is treated differently when it comes to decision-making issues, and there is no reason in law for that to be the case, and we have in at least a few instances caught it and objected and prevented it from being put into law. But so often policies are not something that the legislature has control over, but one can in fact require disclosure of those policies. So getting back to Planned Parenthood's concerns and issues regarding access to contraception, which is a hot button issue around the country now. We never thought we'd be in this situation where the next step is we don't want to have the right to a legal abortion, but now you don't have the right to avoid an unwanted pregnancy because there are restrictions on contraception. So where are we in New York?
Where are we in New York? So I think everyone's very familiar with the Hobby Lobby case, in which our Supreme Court decided that not only are corporations people, but they are corporations with religious beliefs that can deny a woman, her family, health insurance coverage for contraceptive services as directed by the Affordable Care Act. A striking decision, a decision that no one in well, now we're in 2015, but at the point it was last year, a decision so remarkable that would basically put the hands of your healthcare decisions in the hands of your boss. So there's actually two pieces of legislation. One was just introduced by the Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, to really address this issue of employers denying women health insurance coverage for contraception. In this piece of legislation, number one, it would require every insurance company to cover every form of FDA-approved birth control. So no more picking and choosing what they want to cover and what they don't want to cover. It would really require insurance companies to cover it. It would also cover emergency contraception that has been sold over the counter. So on one hand, we were thrilled to have Plan B over the counter so women could access emergency contraception when they needed it. On the other hand, it's very expensive and wasn't covered by insurance. So that would really help remove that barrier. And the third piece of it is really talking about men's services and making sure that they have insurance coverage for sterilization. And then lastly, and very importantly, is allowing the filling of your prescription to go for 12 months as opposed to 3 months right now. And we know for any woman using birth control, to go back every 3 months to refill your prescription becomes another barrier to care. So if we're able to lengthen out the time that women have to keep going back for their birth control, that's going to help tremendously.
Have we had many instances of women being denied a legal prescription based on the religious objections of pharmacists?
Here in New York State, we have not seen that, but throughout the country, laws have been passed in the red states that would basically allow a pharmacist to inject his or her own religious beliefs on a woman coming to fill their prescription. And it's just not emergency contraception. It is regular birth control pills. It is the NuvaRing. It is anything where there is an interaction between a woman and a pharmacist. They can basically make that decision for that woman. And I think it really goes back to what we were talking about earlier and the issues around, a wanted pregnancy. Women have now, there's this real effort to kind of separate women from the family decisions that are being made. So whether it's preventing a pregnancy and becoming a parent when you want to, or having a wanted pregnancy, wanting to take that into term on your terms. I mean, you see again and again the states interfering with this really personal process, and it's really alarming.
Farah, I know you made reference to the fact that there are women who may have a substance abuse problem, and there have been terrible cases around the country regarding the arrest of women. They're just given birth, they're chained to a hospital bed and so forth. Other than the case you gave regarding a C-section, are there other instances in New York State where women's rights as pregnant women have been restricted or abridged?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a case that's pending before the Court of Appeals right now in which a woman on Long Island was involved in a car accident. And in the accident, the passenger and the driver of the other vehicle were killed, and the woman who was the driver was so badly injured that she had to be taken by helicopter to the nearest hospital. And her baby was delivered prematurely by cesarean surgery. Now, she went to trial for manslaughter, 3 counts of manslaughter. The 2 people in the other vehicle and the baby that she gave birth to, who was born alive and died after a few days. And remarkably, the jury acquitted her in the deaths of the 2 people in the other car, but they convicted her on the death of her own baby. And in part, this was because the prosecutor really put her mothering on trial. The prosecutor got up before the jury and said that there was essentially no difference between the baby that was inside her womb at the time and if she had left a 3-month-old infant unrestrained in the back seat, because there wasn't evidence to prove whether or not she had been wearing a seatbelt. So this essentially converted a seatbelt offense into manslaughter. And this woman, if the Court of Appeals decides against her, will go to prison for 9 years. She has other children, and those children will be without their mother. There's nobody in the world who experiences the loss that she did as badly as her. And so it really baffles the mind why the state, especially a state like New York, which has progressive laws on the books, would go so aggressively after a woman who suffered a loss in an accident.
And this was a jury trial.
That was a jury trial.
And it was the evidence provided by the prosecutor that tipped the jury in making this decision? I mean, was it the judge that gave a certain charge, to the jury, or it's hard to know?
I think that the absolute inconsistency of the verdicts in that case really goes to show that it's about punishing women for the outcome of their pregnancies. This idea that a woman is the person who is ultimately responsible for the outcome of her pregnancy, and anything that she does or doesn't do, and in fact the way that she responds to her loss, can be used against her to put her in prison for a very long time.
Well, I think that we probably have 3 to 5 minutes left on the conversation. So are there other things that you would like to be sure that the viewers know about the concerns that the National Advocates for Pregnant Women has in New York State or surrounding states regarding the way in which women are treated specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. One of our most pressing concerns in New York. So I have to say, most of the cases that we work on throughout the United States are based on feticide laws or unborn victims of violence type laws that create separate criminal offenses for causing the death of a fetus or even a fertilized egg or an embryo in many cases. New York is one of the few remaining states that doesn't have such a law on the books. And as many people may be aware, there was a recent tragedy in Troy in which a pregnant woman was killed in an arson that was committed, I think, by her partner. And the response on the part of some people is to want to try to pass a feticide law that would create a separate penalty for the loss of the pregnancy. In our research, we haven't found that these laws have had any deterrent effect or have done anything to protect pregnant women. But what we do know is that where these laws exist, they are inevitably turned around and used against pregnant women themselves. This has happened in states across the country, and we want to stop it from happening in New York, too.
Well, thank you. I think we need to raise more awareness. People have been, I think, fairly complacent in New York State because we've had a history of being somewhat progressive. But there are instances, clearly, where there are the elements that people would be normally think of as being part of a different state's mindset that are intruding into the ethos here in New York State. Adrienne, are there any new initiatives that are coming up for Planned Parenthood, or are there other things that viewers should be aware of?
I think you really hit it on the head when we talk about New York State, particularly residents of New York City, thinking, oh, it's New York, we're super progressive, everything's okay here. But if, as you know, being in Albany, things have basically stalled there for the last decade. You know, we've had this, you know, a great leadership in advancing reproductive freedom, but the last 10 years we've really seen little movement. And as you know, with the Women's Equality Act that we tried to pass with 10 very important pieces to improve the lives of women, the only piece that's not passing is the issue codifying Roe v. Wade. This is New York State. We were a state that made abortion legal before Roe v. Wade, and all we want to do is make that the law, so that if, God forbid, anything happens at the Supreme Court, we know that abortion access is protected here in New York State. The same thing with contraceptives. We need to be very vigilant in ensuring that all New York State women have access to contraceptive services, and it's their decision and not their boss's decision. So I think those are the two pieces we'd like people to be cognizant of.
Well, I thank you very much. We want to be sure that our viewers are informed, but we also want the viewers to be asking their representatives where they stand and how they are responding to or participating in supporting measures that are supportive of women. Are they signing on to those bills? Are they standing strong against bills that are dangerous for women's health and women's ability to make their own decisions and their own health care decisions without the interference by somebody who is a legislator from some other part of the state who's never met them and has no real commitment to their future and their well-being. So I would hope that everybody would be very aware of the concerns, especially young people. I think that people have fallen into a false sense of security. Young women haven't had to make these fights, so they may not realize that they are on the edge of losing these rights. It's been a great discussion, and I want to thank my guests for being here today. And if you'd like to discuss this or any other issue with me further, I invite you to contact me using the information that will appear on the screen. I'm New York State Assembly member Deborah Glick, and thank you for watching Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Thank you very much.